Don't engage alone. We do this together.
Yeah!
We got it! We got it!
New 52 booklet.
Somebody clip this.
Welcome to Under Two Capes, the premier comic podcast of Comics League. I'm your host, Jared, and today it should be just me today, so you guys can hear my amazing voice, and if you're on YouTube, you can see my bearded mug. So today I wanted to talk about a couple of pet peeves that I have. I have a list also from Brit, and it's really stuff about comics, mainly DC, but this also applies to Marvel, that really annoy me when it comes to comics. And in my opinion, my humble opinion, these issues, pun intended, are what's holding back DC as a brand. Now, before we do that, I just want to remind you guys to like this video because it 100% helps this it helps the episode get spread, and subscribe to the channel, even become a member if you feel so inclined. So let's get started. Number one of my comic book pet peeves. Let me put the banner up. There you go. Number one of my comic book pet peeves is an over-reliance on nostalgia. And it really comes down to the fact that, look at, like, a good example of this is when they went from the New 52 to Rebirth. Because what had happened, and I'm talking about pre-Convergence, ignore Convergence, DCU, Futures End, ignore all those events. At that point, because here's the thing about the New 52. Well, actually, first off, so DC in the post-crisis era was floundering. Sales were down, and according to Brit, they were in danger from AT&T from their parent company of getting the axe. So what they did to revitalize the brand is they completely rebooted, except for Batman and Green Lantern. Like, essentially, they treated it like we never published a DC comic book ever. That's the way the continuity is right now. And it worked. It was largely, like, massively successful because you had, for Superman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, and all that, and Justice League, it was basically treated like we never published a comic book and just pick it up. We'll explain the lore as we get to there, which worked 100%. The problem with that is that they didn't completely reboot in the case of Batman and Green Lantern, because in Batman, they said, so one of the, like, tenets of New 52 was that the heroes have been heroes for 5 years. Here's the problem with that on the Batman side, because, and this is the stupidest thing ever. So in 5 years, Batman has had 5 Robins. Dick Grayson has gone from Robin to Nightwing, and he's gotten his back broken by Bane. He's gone back in time and forward in time in Final Crisis. When you really analyze it, it doesn't work at all. Now, with Green Lantern, here's the problem with that. You could argue, and I have seen this argued, that, like, Green Lantern is largely like a sci-fi book that takes place largely in space. So you don't necessarily have to reboot that. And I'm like, okay, that is true. It is largely in space, but it intersected with Earth in pretty spectacular fashion, as in the case of, like, Green Lantern Rebirth, the Sinestro Corps War, Blackest Frickin' Night. And here's the other issue. In the case of Blackest Night, key characters that played a part in that storyline don't exist. So if you're saying that, like, it happened during the 5 years that Green Lantern, from when Hal got the ring to when Justice League started, that doesn't work, because a lot of the characters that were part of Blackest Night didn't show up. So that was a major issue. There was no like full-on reboot. So anyway, so then it lasted for a while, and you had some really cool books. Like Scott Snyder's Batman is like one of the best Batman runs of all time. You had Grant Morrison on Superman, Charles frickin' Soule on Superman and Wonder Woman. You had some A-team writers. You also had some bad books like Teen Titans, which that is a travesty coming from someone who started the George Perez and Marv Wolfman run. I was like, oh my gosh, this the Teen Titans book just utterly sucks. It's not. I don't know what the heck they were going for. The other thing about the Teen Titans book in there is that to explain to basically try and justify why Batman has had 5 Robins in 5 years, they made it so Tim Drake was never Robin. He was always he was just Red Robin. In other words, in terms of Robins, Bruce went from Nightwing essentially to Jason to Damian. Now they later retconned this away in Rebirth with Batman saying, you know, I've always considered you to be a Robin. So they completely like threw that away because that was stupid. So and again, this is why I say why I love the New 52. It wasn't a perfect era. There were still some issues that I significantly had with that part. It didn't work. So moving on, then we get to they decide, let's throw all that away for Twitter points. I say for Twitter points because the books were still selling fairly well, but they were like, let's throw it away and then go to DC Rebirth, which is funny because I see many times on Twitter, and by the way, comic book Twitter is wrong. Gasp. I see it all the time on Twitter when people try and claim that Rebirth was a big sales boost. And I'm like, no, it wasn't. And they'll bring up that, well, they outsold Marvel. And I'm like, that's because what Marvel was doing was replacing all the characters and all new, all different, and their sales tanked. That's why. If Marvel maintained its sales, if Marvel did not do that, A, they would have gotten the MCU crowd, but B, if Marvel had stuck to their guns and not swapped out the characters, they would have stayed up there, and DC would have been below them anyway. So that's not exactly a flex. If one company does something so stupid that it causes its sales to tank, and then you outsell them by default, that's not anything to really write home about. And so Rebirth happened, intended purely on nostalgia. That's 100% the justification for it. And how do I know this? That's what DC said when they were like, we're bringing back everything you love. And even like Dan DiDio brought up that the funny thing about the Rebirth is that they brought back everything that they wanted to they went back to the way things were that made them want to reboot in the first place, which is partly why I think DC's continuity is just such a mess. But I'll go into that on point 3. So I think that's good for point 1. It's basically over-reliance on nostalgia and letting Twitter dictate your line. You shouldn't do that because a significant portion of these Twitter accounts pirate the books, and B, here's the interesting part about this. Even Mark Millar brought this up, and I trust him. He said that less than 10% of the comic book reading audience is on Twitter. So you're not getting the full, you're not getting the opinion of people that actually support the books. Because you don't realize that when you cater to fans, and I'm saying air quote fans, I'm not saying actual people that buy the books. I'm saying the people that say they do but don't. When you cater to these people on Twitter, the people on Twitter don't buy the stuff. So they're not supporting it. They're just staying there so it always stays the way they want it. That's it. So moving on. The other pet peeve I have with DC is everyone gets a family. And here's the problem with that. Here's why they did that. So Batman is widely known for having his Bat family, and that's like all the Robins, Signal sometimes, Jace Fox never, Clown Hunter sometimes. Who else? Alfred, Gordon, and the like. It's all Batman support staff and their little world. And that works. The problem is what DC did is they took that and applied it to nearly every book. Every superhero has a family now. Here's the problem with that. Okay? Here's why it works with Batman. Because Batman and his family, for the most part, are just regular people that have stuff. They're not gods. Whereas as much as I love the Joshua Williamson Superman run from Dawn of DC, as much as I love that run so much, the problem with it, why does anyone try and commit a crime in a city that is patrolled by 5 gods? Why does anyone try that anymore? Central City, why do you try and rob a bank, let's say, when you know you're not escaping the Flash? There's no way you're going to, in a runaway car, you're going to escape the Flash. Yeah, nice try. Green Lantern is the only one where it works because here's why. Green Lantern is, yes, it's a mantle, but it's also a military unit. It's like Navy SEAL. There's not one Navy SEAL. There's an entire group of them. So with Green Lanterns, it's a different story. Now you could say it's because it's successful for Batman. It's believable that they could do that. It could be successful with these other groups, but that's the way to give everyone else on these families their due attention. And that's an interesting point there. The refutation of that is that you can give them all attention, but make it in a way that's not like forced. Like, here's what I would do personally. The Superman book is just the Clark Kent Superman book. That's it. Action Comics can be the anthology where you tell stories about each of the different family members. And you know what? They kind of did that in the beginning of Dawn of DC Action, where they kind of did the idea of like, Action would be the anthology that has all these different stories about Kenan, about Connor, about Kara, all the others. That works. In terms of Flash, just don't do it. Have Barry be the Justice League Flash and have like Wally be the multiverse Flash or vice versa. They kind of did that. Just do it that way. And for the love of God, don't let Tom King write Flash. It will not work. And with Wonder Girls, with the Wonder Woman family, they keep adding on Wonder Girls because let's face it, that's currently what Trinity is. And you just added Yara. I almost said Yaira. But the problem with doing that is that you had Yara, who was actually pretty popular when she was introduced in Future State. And she was one of the few very successful Future State books. Then what you decide to do is don't cancel her book, don't give her another book, and then just make her fully irrelevant with adding in Trinity. Just because you were like, oh, Batman has a kid, Superman has a kid, Wonder Woman should have a kid. No, she shouldn't. Stop with this logic. This is not logic. It doesn't work. That's the same logic of Batman has a family, Superman must have a family, Flash must have a family. It doesn't work. Are there great characters in the families? Yes, 100%. But having them all congregate in one city to patrol it, I do not see any crime happening in that city. It does. Because let me put it this way. Yeah, I'm applying real world logic to superheroes, but if you're a criminal, are you really going to try and commit a crime where there's 5 gods patrolling? There's about a 0.1% chance you'll be able to get away with it. It's not happening. Yeah, so that's it. Number 3, continuity is a mess. Now, here's what I meant earlier when I talked about continuity. So, first thing DC did, which was kind of stupid, is have the whole Wonder Woman origin confusion. And here's the thing, and it's largely like, Ben, since New 52, they've gone kind of back and forth and hinted that, does Wonder Woman have the Zeus origin? Does she have the Clay origin? Personally, I don't care which one. I'm just using her as an example. And then you have also, there was a year where they were for Batman stories. They had 3 Jokers, Joker War, and Death Metal, all coming out at the exact same time. And I know they weren't happening at the same time, but it kind of seemed like that. And it just doesn't work because it just adds more confusion. And that's the problem with continuity, is extremely impenetrable. It's like if I were to go down the street, if someone were to come up to me and go, "Hey, Jared, I want to read Batman." Here's the problem with that, because then I got to go, okay, so do you want to read? So in order to start on Batman, you really should start on Scott Snyder's Batman and then continue on through there and then go to Tom King. But you can skip issue 50 to 100, and then you can go to this issue, to this issue. It's too complicated. That's why the New 52 was so popular, because there practically was no continuity at the beginning. Just pick up the number ones, start from there, you're good to go. Then DC does what is, in my opinion, one of the stupidest decisions continuity-wise. They did the whole Omniverse thing, and I know that there have been some people that said they just mean that if there's an Earth for like any canon. But I'm like, it's a problem when DC says everything is canon. They didn't clarify that enough. They just said everything's canon now. And the visual that they showed for this in Death Metal, and I'll show a visual here on the screen, is Wonder Woman's lasso of truth cords going into prime characters' brains and like unlocking their memories. So that's DC telling you everything of these characters' lives is canon. Harkening back to, so Wonder Woman now has two origins now. Nice. And then you get into the idea that, like, in the current Wonder Woman book, Tom King basically said that, oh yeah, she's a thing of clay now. He brought back the clay origin just by saying it. He didn't like give an explanation. He just said, oh no, she's the clay origin. So in previous to this run, she went from being Zeus's daughter to the clay thing. Now you can like a factor where technically she is Zeus's daughter because of Hippolyta sculpted her from clay, held her up, and then Zeus shot the lightning. That could be him siring the child, which that could work. But you need to tell me that. That's the other problem with DC that's not on my list, but I just thought of it. They do so much telling but not showing, where they're like, telling without showing, because with that's a perfect example. If Tom King had given us an explanation, really what happened is that, like this way, Hippolyta and Zeus never really slept together. They just did this and this. And I'll be like, okay, but you need to tell me that. Anyway, going on to number 4, and this is an editorial one. I figured I'd mix it up a little bit. DC won't tell creatives no. And here's my example of this. He who must not be named Brian Michael frickin' Bendis. Yes, I have to play the clip now, so here you go.
Why did you say that name?
Here's that problem, because he came in with all these stupid Superman ideas and that would character assassinate the character, and then guess what? DC didn't say no. DC just let him do whatever he wants. Or here's the other thing, and this is kind of part of won't tell creatives no. It's like even in the New 52, when like Dan Jurgens was writing the Superman book, and they told me you have to write Superman this way, Jurgens was like, I don't want to write that. And I'm like, dude, you're writing Superman. If you want to write for Superman, and this is the way current canon Superman is, you have to write that version. Otherwise, don't write the book. I get it that you're stuck in the post-crisis era, because that's when you had some form of relevancy, and that's why you keep referencing the death of Superman. But you can't tell DC, no, I don't want to write this character that way, when they're telling you editorial guidelines. Editorial is king because that's what's selling. I don't want to get on a whole tirade on that. To be clear, I like some of Dan Jurgens' books, but his Superman stuff is largely like, But anyway, that's my point. They won't tell creatives no. Or when Tom King wanted to have Wonder Woman punch her mother in the face, I'll have that visual up here. I'm just like, what in the...
What is this?
What the heck is going on here? It doesn't work, because that is stupid. Because ostensibly, he said like one of the main sources of research he did was the George Perez run. He's obviously homaging that in this scene. And my problem with it is that then you character assassinate that moment, because young Diana would not punch her mother in the face. What is your problem? But that's just me. Moving on, I'm just putting it out. Too many events, one after another. And here's the problem with that. And we're seeing that right now currently, because DC just announced their Absolute Power event. And then they're also doing, by the way, the Brainiac event with Superman. You had it's not Beast Wars. It's like, the point is, it's the Beast event. I'm forgetting the name of it. I'll put the name down here. You have that. Then they decide, then previous to that, you also had like Gotham War. You also had all these other events, line-wide or just character-wide. And then you have like all these tie-ins and everything like that. So you're burning out your audience on these big epic stories, because you can have big epic storylines. And that's cool. That's why like the Crisis storylines are so cool, because they showed up. There was a break in between those storylines. Now it's like every single time there's an event, I'm like, stop it. You have to let the line breathe and let the characters just breathe for like the max events that you should have is 2 a year. That's it. 2 a year max. You can have, and that's counting character events. You need to have regular stories, because then it's like, okay, you can have your epic storylines. There's like big wars, massive stakes and everything. And then you can just have like the regular events where like Superman catches Lex Luthor in a one-off story and everything like that. But DC doesn't do that. They just say, balls to the walls, let's do this. This massive invasion happens. And it's showing, because it's burning out the audience, and that's one of the many reasons why DC sales are in the tank. Then on the final one of my lists, and then I also have one from Brit, so I'll go over that one. It's the same characters over and over and over again. And this kind of gets off, and this kind of goes off of what I saw on a CBR list, is that there's too much Batman, and DC ignores the B-listers. And here's the thing, yes, they do. Because here's the problem, because DC publishes way too much Batman books. And a lot of them, some of them are in canon, some of them are not in canon. The problem with that is that then you slack on the other characters like Superman, because you're like, it doesn't matter if Superman or Wonder Woman or the Justice League sells, because guess what? We'll be buoyed over with Batman money. And that's a big problem. Plus, then people think that like Batman's the only character in DC, which I don't know who thinks that, but I'm sure some people do. The issue with it is that, and pun intended, there you go. I love how I keep saying issue. The problem with this is that it also dilutes the Batman brand. Too much of anything is not going to be good. You essentially create batflation. Yes, I'm coining that term. Batflation. That's what it is. And eventually, you're going to dry up that pot. And then when you dry up that pot, what's DC going to do if Batman all of a sudden stops selling? Or has a nosedive in sales and doesn't sell? They had an occasion like that. It was when Tom King was on Batman. The sales went so low that they had to cut off his series and just tell him, we'll give you a maybe out of continuity miniseries to wrap it up. And then we also get onto like the female characters that get ignored. Or here's the thing, the LGBTQ characters that get ignored, because you have badass LGBTQ characters, specifically Midnighter and Apollo, who are basically Batman and Superman, but gay. But they are some of the coolest, dynamic, most powerful DC characters, and you barely see them. Last time I saw them was in the summer book they did, in the swimsuit book they did. And then I saw them in Superman Warworld Saga, and I was very happy, because it was basically a Superman the Authority book. But still, I was like, okay, these characters are great, because there's a scene where like the rest of the Authority is like captured by Mongol, and Midnighter has to like start an underground resistance movement to fight against Mongol. It's really cool. But you're missing out on stories like that by just having Batman. Eventually, again, I'm going to say this in conclusion of my list, it's going to fall apart. Now, going to Brit's list, and she actually has some ones that I didn't even think of. Comic writers' obvious unprofessional biasness. You can make a story without putting down any other characters' relationship, status quo, etc. And this goes off of Tomasi coming on to Superman, Wonder Woman. And Brit and I are going to talk about this on Legacy in a few weeks because we're going to talk about each volume of Superman, Wonder Woman. The problem, so what happened is Sewell came on the book and it was a top seller, one of the top sellers of DC New 52, to the point where they didn't expect it to sell that well. And it was doing great. They even got to like 100,000 copies sold on a Superman and Wonder Woman book. That never happens for Superman and or Wonder Woman. Batman all the time, but Superman and Wonder Woman, no. So then and in terms of like drop off, it didn't drop that far or steep, and it even had more like peaks and troughs. So it was more of a healthy series than like say Super Sons. Yes, I'm taking a shot at that. So then Sewell and Daniel are unceremoniously thrown off the book. Then they bring in Peter J. Tomasi, and Tomasi was basically 100% said that indicated that he was going to write it not as a couple but as a partnership. And he put so much antagonism in the book, and he even said, I put that in there because it's like the first two volumes, that was like the honeymoon phase. And I'm like, so he has to fight. They had to fight Zod and Feora, detonate a nuclear bomb. She almost killed him because he was turning to Doomsday. That was the honeymoon phase. That is why I am virtually convinced that when Tomasi came on that book, he did not read the previous two volumes. He just came on and decided, I'm just going to do what I want. He even retconned in some animosity between Superman and Wonder Woman when they first met. And he goes, you're strong, I know. And I'm like, why are you are destroying a relationship? And that's partly why that you see such steep drop off in that book. It's because of Tomasi. But anyway, he let his bias for Lois Lane get in the way of telling a good storyline. And guess what happened? And by the way, when he got his way, Superman Rebirth, it didn't sell that well. And Super Sons bombed hard. The first issue was good, but for the most part, it went steep downturn and never got over. I think it's like 20 or 30,000 copies. That is abysmal. So that's it there. Number two, also speaking of Tomasi and Tom King a little bit. Oh no. Nerfing, watering down characters because writers feel intimidated and can't accept that challenge. Just like Tom King said he was very intimidating doing Wonder Woman. And to a certain degree, I get it, because when you're writing for the Trinity, that's a different experience than like writing for like Adam Strange. Because even James Gunn has said that the reason why he likes working on the less known characters is because there's less expectations. The problem with that is that, and he goes to write Superman. But anyway, the thing about this is that then they straight up write these characters as like emotionless automatons. Like Wonder Woman in the Tom King run, as much as I like some of the story decisions he's doing, the problem with that is when it comes to the way he writes Wonder Woman is that she's largely like cold, very robotic. Like I definitely read she has the accent for Gal Gadot, which I like because, spoiler alert, I like the Snyderverse. Right there, you can see my trident. I have the Cell hashtag there. The point is, I like that, so I like seeing that homage. This is not the first Snyderverse thing that will show up in a Tom King book. But the problem with the way he does it is because Gal Gadot was at least emotional and happy and smiled more. It's just, and then you have to convince us that Wonder Woman is so good by like having her take care of this cancer kid, which that was a good moment. The problem is it doesn't work in your story because the government is hunting down Wonder Woman, is demonstrating intent to kill anyone that's near her, and you bring them to, and you basically lead them to a cancer kid's home. Are you stupid? The answer is yes, but okay. It doesn't work. To a degree, I get what, to be clear, in conclusion of this point, I get what they're going with. They have not done anything cool with it. And then number 3, status quo being stagnant or safe need changes and risks. And this is what Dan DiDio has said many times, is like, he said one of the issues with DC is that they don't take risks. That's what the new 52 was. They took a lot of risks, including on a lot of books like Superman and Wonder Woman, because that was a gamble, because you didn't know if that coupling was going to be popular enough. And that book was massive for them. Hell, rebooting the continuity in general for a fresh audience and sort of like de-aging the characters, making them more like hot-headed in a way so they can grow. It's called a character arc, people. But that in itself was a risk. And you know what? It worked great for DC. A lot of the modern fan base came from either the Snyderverse or the new 52. Even the Snyderverse was a risk. They gave a relatively unknown director at the time. I mean, he was kind of known for like, he had done Watchmen at the time. But to give him Superman, that was a big risk. And you know what? Despite what people will try and tell you, it actually was successful enough to the fact that BVS, adjusting for inflation, made $1 billion. But beyond that, this is not a Snyderverse discussion. We can have that, but later. Number 4, fans being obnoxious, self-entitled, Brett says, a-holes, who think they know everything, and if you don't align with their way of thinking, label you as not being a real fan. This annoys the hell out of me. Because I'll have people, because the Twitter fan base likes to think that they own these characters and that they have read every single version of these characters. And then when you tell them, well, when Batman first showed up, he had a gun, they're like, well, that's not canon anymore. I'm like, A, it is canon because DC said everything's canon, so you can't say that anymore. And B, you didn't say canon. You just said he doesn't use guns or kill people. I'm showing you pages where he does. Specify it then. If they say he's in canon, I'm like, the batarang is in the dude's arm. Dad has cut an artery at some point. But point is, then they have the nerve to say, well, you're just a tourist and not a real fan. To which I send the picture of my shelf behind me and I go, yeah, try that again. I've read pretty much every single comic on that shelf, except for the ones that I've clearly labeled to read, which is that one for DC and that one for Marvel. That's it. Everything else I have read and enjoyed. And it's not just the new 52. It's a wide variety of eras because I like all of DC. That's what these fans don't get when they completely blast a version of a character saying, that's not that, that's not that. Here's the problem with that. New 52 in Snyderverse, that was a lot of people's intro to DC, mine too, and I went back and read the other stuff. Say what you want, even if you personally don't like it, you can see that a lot of fans have started, got into comics because of Zack Snyder, got into comics because of the new 52. And even with me, at least with me, I thought Superman was a dweeb originally. Then when I saw Man of Steel and the character broken down to his core and then rebuilt, he was rebuilt, and then rebuilt, I was like, okay, now I get why Superman is so cool. Then I went back and read like a lot. I read some post-crisis Superman, some new 52, some modern. I read a lot of different eras of DC. I get not everyone does that, but blanket accusing me of not accusing me and people that like Zach or like the new 52 of not being fans is just stupid. I'm going to say that right there. And it's something that has to stop. And then number 5 is trying to force headcanons as facts, taking things out of context and straight up lying or revisionism. Yeah, and it gets into that because they'll like go, because I see people on Twitter all of a sudden like trying to explain how a story lines up, and they'll go, well, it's this. And I'm like, where's that in the book? And they go, well, it's not in the book, it's in my headcanon. I'm like, your headcanon is not canon. That's what you have to know about this. Your headcanon, unless it's on the book, it's not canon. It's the same thing with like a lot of the shipping community. When they all of a sudden think that like just because two characters look at each other, they're in love. I'm like, no, that's not the way it works. You can interpret it as that. To be clear, let me be clear on that. If you have a different interpretation of the book and you're like, oh, okay, I see it this way, that's totally valid. You're allowed to do that. And that's one of the fun parts about comic books. Just don't present your thing as fact, saying it is this way, I'm right. It doesn't work like that. And then even with the issue where, like, I think it was like 2 of Wonder Woman, it may have been issue 1, but the point is, when we see Wonder Woman doing the contest, and then the Sovereign's like, there are 2 versions of Wonder Woman's story. One, she's made of clay, and then the Twitter community ignored what came after and was like, they restored the clay origin, yay! And then I'm like, literally read the next page. It says, or she was the daughter of Zeus. It's a little ambiguous. And I'm like, that's what King is saying. It's ambiguous. He's not taking one position. He would later do that. But my point is that at that point, you can't just blindly look at what you want to see and interpret that on the page. Doesn't work like that. So that's, oh, by the way, Brit had one more. Repeating the same storylines. And oh boy, do I have issues with this. My main issue with this is that how many times, and I said this on my problems with DC animated movies video, how many times have we gotten the death of Superman as a movie, whether or not animated or live action? Yeah, how many times have we gotten Flashpoint for a movie? Now 2. I hope we don't get a 3rd one. The problem with that is that these characters have so many great stories, and yet you ignore a lot of them. Batman has the most animated Batman stories are overwhelmingly represented. Granted, it's because Batman and Spider-Man are the 2 most popular comic book characters, bar none. But it gets back into there's like too much Batman content, and you're ignoring your other IPs. And really, at that point, you might as well just license out the other characters and just keep Batman if you're not going to put that much effort into it. So that's Brit and Mai's list, but I'm going to go through to conclude a list from CBR. So this list was from 2023. So it was actually February of last year. So it's a year old. So I'm just going to go through this and like, I'll actually evaluate to see if in a year DC has addressed these points. DC has mostly abandoned its B list. Now, to a degree, this is right, but to a degree, it's not correct anymore. What I mean by that is because in Dawn of DC, you had Hawkgirl getting her own book. You had Fire and Ice. Even the books are not good. Let me put it this way. The quality of the book is irrelevant to this discussion. I'm just saying the characters have their own books there. And you're giving all these characters the attention. I mean, Adam Strange, Mr. Miracle, all these books are getting their just dues. Then you get to Black Label hasn't been used as well as it should have. Yeah, because what Black Label was originally supposed to do is they're supposed to grab the best creators and tell a lot of different out of continuity stories. Now, here's the problem with Black Label, though. It became the Bat Label pretty much because it's all Batman books for the most part. And it became they tried to do the whole mature comics thing, and that was also the original thing. But when Batman's penis leaked out in a page of Batman Damned, they pretty much abandoned that. And I'm like, okay, but it's a mature comic. You could just said it's a mature comic. And then what I mean by it being mostly Batman is that if you look at it, most of the titles are Batman related. And a few of them are even in continuity, because here's the crazy part. So at the end of Jeff Johns' Justice League run, at the end of Darkseid War, Batman asked the Mobius chair, what's the Joker's name? And he goes, my God. And you don't find out until the very end what he said. And then Batman said, the chair told me there were 3 Jokers. And then we wouldn't get the answer until 3 Jokers came out. Problem presented when I saw it was Black Label, which typically means it's out of continuity. But then Jeff Johns is like, I've always wanted to write an in-continuity Batman story, and I have. And I'm like, but that it's Black Label. I thought that was not canon. And basically, they just threw everything in Black Label. It really just it didn't work out that well. DC's Watchmen obsession. Yeah, because with Rebirth, they were trying to explain why like the universe didn't reset completely back to post-crisis when Barry went back in time. Didn't work. I talked about the continuity. DC has worn out many tropes like Bat God and all that stuff. It's like, I'm sorry, because he's Batman doesn't work as an excuse for why Batman can do all these things anymore. Everything is a crisis and it's getting annoying. Exactly with my events thing. The Silver and Bronze Age obsession is worn thin, and that's like where like they ignore Wally West because they want to bring in Barry Allen. They basically sideline Kyle Rayner and Green Lantern Rebirth because Jeff Johns liked Hal Jordan. To be clear, I love that run of Green Lantern, 100%. It's just my problem is when you also have these other characters that then become redundant because Wally West's the Flash, and as I've said many times, even the Flash. I hate when superheroes share mantles. It is completely asinine. Because now with the movie and the show, when people think of Flash, they think of Barry Allen. They don't think of Wally West. Unless they saw like the Justice League show. But again, that's a smaller subset. In the vast majority of the general audience, if they saw the Flash movie or if they saw the Flash show, when they think of the Flash, they think of Barry Allen. When they think of Batman, they don't think of Jace Fox. They think of Bruce Wayne. When they think of Aquaman, they don't think of Calder. They think of Arthur Curry. When they think of Superman, they don't think of John Kent. They think of Clark Kent. That's it. I mentioned female superheroes, and there's way too many Batman books. So yeah, that's like my list so far. And overall, let me be clear, I still love comic books and DC to my core. I am a DC fan for sure. And that's why I tried to give like solutions throughout this episode, just so, because what I like to do with Comics League, if I point out a problem, I like to provide a solution so I don't come off as too much of a hater. I like to say, I love this stuff. Here's how I would do it. It may not work. It may work. It may not work. But you know what? I'm going to try and provide a solution. Drop below your like top 5 favorite, your top 5 like comic book pet peeves, and how. And actually, you know what? I'll make it a little thought experiment. Drop below your pet peeves and how you would fix those pet peeves, and I'll go through them and let you know what I think, and then. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. And once again, we're on the road to 1K subscribers. So I'm hoping to get there by this year. I should be able to. We're currently at 940 subscribers. So we're working on getting that up. I just need 60 more. And then in terms of content that you guys can look forward to, tonight is CLD, the tonight being Friday night because this comes out on Friday, where we're going to be talking about Zack Snyder on Rogan, Rooster Teeth shutting down among different topics. And then for movie night on Sunday, we're going to be talking about Kick-Ass 2. And for Super Wonder Legacy, Brit and I are going to start talking about the Charles Sewell and maybe eventually Peter J. Tomasi Superman book. By the way, shout out to Brit for providing the list. I really appreciate you, Brit. And so basically, I believe like maybe the next 4 to 5 weeks we'll talk about them, or we'll talk about each volume, or we'll just compile the Tomasi run into one episode, so we don't have to extend it, so we can get back to happy stuff. So that's what you guys can look forward to for Comics League. In terms of like my next problem with video, I'm still thinking about that. I have some ideas, but I don't want to like tip you guys off yet. I want to have a little bit more of a surprise, and that's what I'm going to leave it. So stay heroic, everyone. Remember, Lois Lane is Lois Lame, and remember, Zoe is for life.